Thank you very much. And I'd obviously like to add my welcome to everyone. And I think it's great to see so many people being so interested in what is actually very, very topical, very, very important. And although I think there's already been a vast amount of discussion on artificial intelligence and even artificial intelligence in education, I think there are some aspects that have been overlooked. And I think there are some aspects which are specific to the Commonwealth of Learning and the Commonwealth in general. And so hopefully we can challenge today's panelists to think through some of those issues and to comment on each other's contributions. I'm conscious that time's relatively tight, but if anyone in the panel wants to react to any of the other contributions, that would make it probably quite a bit livelier and very helpful. So thank you in advance for everything you're going to contribute this afternoon. I suppose the first and most obvious set of topics or questions are around education itself. So perhaps if we could start with Dr. Helen, just in the order in which we've been given them. I'd like to ask the panel, do you think AI, what do you think about the emerging ideas for teachers and learners? You know, what are your views about innovations in pedagogy, the worries about plagiarism, the extent of pastoral support, and what AI does for open and distance learners? So over to you, Dr. Helen, briefly.
Okay, thank you very much. Good afternoon from Nigeria, National Open University of Nigeria. So talking about generative AI, first, it's a kind of AI that's that produces text, images, sounds, videos, responding to certain prompts. And just as Professor Traxler said, there are issues around this regarding education. And such issues border generally on academic integrity. Despite the issues, it also holds great potentials because it helps in repetitive tasks and all. But the major issue that concerns us as educators and distance learners and teachers to learners is that borders on how it affects teaching, how it affects learning, and how it affects assessment. And so vis-a-vis the issue of academic integrity. So when it comes to that, we begin to ask ourselves, how do we fare as faculty in the age of generative AI and the impact they are having on education? And so my thoughts on that is that first, teaching, learning, assessment would have to be redefined. It's no longer business as usual. We need to infuse more critical thinking skills in our students. And I also think that generative AI, they are not necessarily foes, but rather they are friends that we ought to be critical of. So it's not everything about them that we could take hook, line, and sinker. The way to go is to first use it. For example, maybe in a methodology class, we could use them, or maybe one of them, ChatGPT, for example, as a form of learning aid, collaborative tool to teach methodology. And by that, we're invariably teaching to the students how not to use AI and the appropriate ways of using AI. It's also important for us as faculty to in as much as we also want to pass on this attitude to students in this age of technology, to also develop some kind of self-learning skills, because it's very important for adaptability and also to maintain our agency in decision-making in the face of a world that is, do I say plague, or a world that we live in where there is a lot of use of generative AI. And so when it concerns distant learning education, in particular, because distant ODL relies heavily on the use of technology. There is also a need for reskilling, upskilling, AI digital literacy for faculties, and also to also have policy statements on its use, the appropriateness of it, and the likes. I'll stop there for now.
Okay, thank you. No, that's fabulous in the sense that you've set the agenda and covered an awfully large number of topics. And as you say, there's a need to look at the curriculum, look at assessment, and look at the way we teach, and especially the extent to which that impacts on open and distance learners, who I guess are far more dependent on the technology. So perhaps if we go to Professor Maura, she can build on that and add her own insights. Thank you ever so much.
Thank you. Yes, I agree with what Professor Helen said. I think as an educator, or as educators, we're responsible for teaching our students fundamental life skills. We're not just trying to teach them content, but there are important skills such as spotting issues, critical analysis of issues and problems, how to communicate our thoughts on these issues and problems, potential solutions, and so forth. And I worry and wonder a bit whether Gen AI is going to get in the way of students developing those critical skills, because it becomes very easy to get answers. And I look back when the calculator was introduced, and we were all worried nobody would learn any mathematical skills because of the calculators. And certainly a calculator is good for helping you balance a checkbook or do formal math as a faculty member if you're publishing something. But a calculator doesn't really help you if you're at the grocery store and you're looking at two products and you're trying to figure out which is cheaper per volume. You have to do that in your head, and you have to actually know how to do a little bit of math. So I think that we should see Gen AI as supplementary, not a replacement. Otherwise, it's going to de-skill students instead of teach them. And I think assessment clearly has gotten much more challenging. And I myself have moved from short essays and papers to I'm going to require a reflection journal this year with a reflection after each class, because I don't trust, based on just this past year, how much GPT chat I got back in response to regular essay prompts. So I don't think GPT is going to attend my class and have reflections on it. So I've moved to that, and I'm using more video and project-based sort of assessments instead of routine tests. So essentially, I don't think we can stop students from using it, but the real question is, how do we incorporate it and how do we account for it, since they will use it, but make sure they still learn these critical life skills that they need, rather than just learning how to spit out an answer.
Yeah, sure. I think we might come back to the life skills issue, because clearly AI doesn't merely affect what happens inside education, but wider society as well. Perhaps if we move on to Professor Mausam next, we can have some remarks that will move us on from there.
Sure, and thank you very much. And I should say that
thank you.
It's hard to disagree with Maura or Helen. It's they make excellent points. I want to share just a couple of experiments done at IIT Delhi regarding the use of these GPT technologies in the context of, let's say, programming assignments. I come from a computer science department, so maybe I'll first talk about that. So one of the faculty members actually said, okay, I want you to learn how to write SQL queries, but I can't force you not to use ChatGPT. So let's try to see if ChatGPT gives me the right SQL queries for my task.
Mm.
And he did this in the class. He wrote the full prompt, the full question. Believe it or not, ChatGPT did give a good looking SQL query, but it was wrong. So collectively as a class, they looked at the query, they said, oh, where is the mistake? They put in the effort, they figured out this is the mistake. So they gave another prompt saying that fix this kind of mistake. ChatGPT did give another code. It did fix one kind of mistake, but there was another mistake still there. So they again debugged it manually in the class, did another prompt. And by the time the third code came back from ChatGPT, it was indeed correct. So the professor told the students, look, this is a system that you can talk to and it can give you code, but it will make mistakes. Now it's up to you what you want to do. If you want to use it, go ahead and use it. And most of the students did not use these because they felt that the time it took for them to find mistakes in the produced code and give the next prompts was much more than the amount of effort they would have put in to actually write the code in the first place. Now, this is an experiment in the computer science department. Another faculty member did a separate experiment in a non-computational department where the students had limited CS skills. And so he gave the kinds of questions in the biology department where they had to write code. And the students actually used ChatGPT and got good code, and the students actually used it a lot. So my sort of summary of these experiments, these are early experiments, of course, is that the language models make a lot of mistakes. And unless we learn how to program well, we would not be able to separate out the good from the bad. So it is important for the students to recognize that they need to first understand what is going on before they start using these things as tools. And moreover, if you become good at it, actually using them can be more at harm than at benefit. But on the other hand, if you're a weak programmer and you want a clutch to do more than what you are able to and you don't want to put in the effort, then it will provide you some clutches and take you more of the way than where you were earlier. So that's my point number one. My point number two is regarding English. And that is because we come from an Indian setup where a lot of students who come from interiors of the country and who come from non-English speaking, non-urban locales, they write non-grammatical, non-fluent English, and they're not able to express their thoughts very well in the language that is the language of instruction. And I have found that if you give early ideas to ChatGPT, it produces beautiful prose, perfect grammar, beautiful words. And sometimes people in India or people in non-English speaking countries might be actually at a benefit, because now language is not what is separating people, it's the ideas. And so I in interest technologies that are going to come up. And I'm really hopeful. Of course, there are more challenges, and I agree with Maura and Helen that we need to be more innovative in our the way questions are asked, in the way the assessments get done, and in a way critical thinking is developed. And I think we will need to rediscover ourselves, but it is not all bad, is the point I wanted to make.
Thanks. You make two interesting points. I mean, one is a contribution to the kind of, is it just a calculator argument? And, should we take it on board on that basis? But the other actually is a kind of creeping concern that when you're using AI to help people's English, you're teaching a particular kind of English. There's a built-in prejudice in favor of, I don't know, maybe American English as opposed to British English, as opposed to Indian English. And that's something we can come back to. But maybe if we finish off with Dr. David and then move on to another topic. Dr. David.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much. Yeah, for me, I tend to agree with the previous speakers that these generative models and AI in particular, it is going to have a significant contribution to the education sector, especially when we talk to open education. I will start with what transpired in the second industrial revolution, because the second industrial revolution and the fourth industrial revolution, they share some commonalities. Now, when electricity came and became a reality, it really transformed the lives of the people. From almost every aspect of human life was changed. Productivity improved, the quality of life improved, and even the education sector was really impacted. So for me, I compare artificial intelligence with electricity of the fourth industrial revolution. It will bring a lot of changes, both in which are beneficial and at the same time detrimental to the education sector, particularly on issues related to availability. If you look at people who live in the remotest parts of the country, especially those who want to engage on online education, they can benefit a lot when they use these language models, because the issue of availability will not be a problem when we compare to human instructors, where sometimes they're available, sometimes they're not available. But when we use these language models, they will be available all the time, 24/7. So that one will bring some benefits to those in remote areas. But I must indicate that, of course, adding to what other previous speakers have said, it now depends with the ability of these people to use these resources, the availability of the resources themselves, and the availability of a stable connection. So without this stable connection, availability of resources, availability of gadgets, it really becomes, it continues to be a pipe dream for these people. Just like electricity, we still have millions and millions of people without access to electricity after decades and decades of electricity being in existence. That's the same again, especially in those people in developing and emerging economies. So AI, for me, I think it will bring a positive change to the education sector, but it depends with the issue of availability. One point as I conclude is that in many developing nations, there is limited training data. When you look at these generative models, the quality of output or the quality of answers you get, especially when you engage with it, depends with the type of data which it was used to be trained on. So in many developing nations, there is less digital content available on their local languages compared to developed countries. So language models will require a significant amount of diverse, high quality training data to achieve optimal performance, especially in these countries like Zimbabwe, my country, South Africa, and most of the countries in the African continent. So that's what I can say for now.
That's great. And I'm very grateful that you actually draw attention to the way in which digital divide, digital poverty is reconfigured, in which, we have new problems to worry about as well as new opportunities. And to some extent, I'd like to move on to that, actually. If we could go back to Professor Maura, just to start off the rotation in a different order next time round. I'm wondering what this tells us about the changes to the curriculum that will help our students flourish and survive in worlds where AI is such a potent force. This is the life skills question, I suppose, again, that actually the world will be changed. How do we address that as teachers?
So I think there's no question that generative AI isn't going away anytime soon. If anything, there's going to be more of it. So we have to teach students what it is, how it works, the strengths and limitations, and how to use it responsibly. But we also have to remember, as with prior industrial revolutions and developments, this isn't the end of the story. So we have to teach students to be ready for the next thing. because in 6 months or in a year, this is going to be outdated and there's going to be something new. There was a very famous hockey player in Canada named Wayne Gretzky who said, you have to skate to where the puck is going, not to where the puck is
Yes.
right now. And I think that's important, that we have to think about what's next, and teaching students in general about how to deal with technologies. I also think our education system, at least Western education system, which has always been, say, 4 or more years, you get a degree and you're done. I think that we may be nearing the end of that kind of education, and it may now be micro credentials all throughout one's life, because I think this technology is going to get to keep working. But I also think we can't forget that we have to get the educators up to speed first, because I'm not sure all our educators know as much as they should about the technologies that are here today and that are coming. I know I was trained as a lawyer, not as a technologist, and as far as I could keep myself away from math and technology, that's what I wanted to do during my legal training. And that kind of siloing today is not going to be possible anymore. We all have to be able to learn about technology.
Okay, thanks. That was a very comprehensive but kind of overarching reply. So I'm wondering how the other panelists feel it pans out in their specific countries and contexts. What about Professor Mausam? How does it look in India?
Yeah, and I completely agree with Professor Maura. I mean, I think there is no alternative to being nimble and doing continuing education today in such a rapidly changing landscape of technology. I mean, as AI researcher in 2013, I would not have been able to predict the deep learning revolution. In 2016, I would not have been able to predict BERT and its successors. And even in 2019 or 20, I would not have been able to predict where GPT-4 today is, right? So it's just the speed at which things have been moving are just impossible to predict, which is what makes it even more difficult, Professor Maura, that we don't know where the puck is going. It's very hard to predict, right? But I do believe that lots of very exciting, innovative applications are going to come out. I mean, there is more democratization of AI that is happening with these large language models. And so the bar is actually coming lower in whether you can use these models in the context of your application. One of the places in education, I think that some things might happen, which might be good for mankind at large, because I feel that in a country like India, the number of highly qualified teachers is limited. The top good cities, urban cities, obviously have a lot of amazing teachers. But as you get into tier 3 cities, tier 4 cities and towns and so on, small towns, the quality of top talent as a teacher is very, very poor. Same for healthcare and doctors, same for many, many other services and so on. So I expect that as we evolve, AI is going to play more and more role there. For example, imagine a world where we already have all these Coursera courses and courses on Udacity and all these various platforms, MOOCs, right? But you cannot learn the subject deeply because you are not interacting with the teacher and there is limited support in actually learning something. But now you can imagine an AI system acting like an intermediary between the teacher and the student, and also becoming like your tutor, if not a teacher. And imagine that the student is watching the video and the AI system is stopping the video in the middle and telling you, asking you questions, making sure that you have understood the part, identifying your learning holes, taking you back to the part of the video which you may have missed, and things like that. You never know what the world tomorrow is going to look like with the kind of skills that we are starting to see. So I think there will be a lot of innovation in education at every step of the way, including college education, the way we program, the way we give questions, the way we actually assess their answers. It is possible the teacher's life will become easier also, because at least part of the assessment might be done by the large language models. Who knows, right? So it's very hard to predict, but I think it's a very, very vastly changing landscape, in my opinion.
I mean, that reminds me of our dreams of intelligent tutoring, and actually what you've added into that dream of 30 years ago was the potential of doing it over distances, which sounds very upbeat. And I suppose to go back to the earlier point, when we talk about where is the puck going, two things cross my mind. I mean, one is that there is the increasing potential for computers to design computers, and machines to build machines. And that means that the rate of change is increasing. And I suppose the other thing, and I'm going to get my analogy wrong here, but we're not all on the same ice rink. Have I got that right? And therefore the puck goes in different directions to different places, each for our different context and our different country. Anyway, sorry, after that, over to Dr. David, please, to the South African perspective.
Oh, thank you so much. For me, I also agree with the previous speakers, but I think one of the things that needs to be done, I think, is to promote digital literacy, but not only digital literacy, but critical digital literacy, where that digital literacy is not limited to basic technical skills, to type, to send an email, to present a PowerPoint, but the understanding of the algorithms, the biases that follows these algorithms, and the ethical considerations around them. So that should be one of the important actions that should be taken by institutions of higher learning to introduce learners to artificial intelligence. Here at the University of Johannesburg, we have a course which is done by almost everyone at the university, the introduction of artificial intelligence in the fourth industrial revolution. So it kind of introduces learners to the biases that follows these the algorithms. So it is very important to teach our learners how to access the credibility and the reliability of the algorithms. And I must also indicate that with artificial intelligence, it have the ability to do certain tasks, especially in education, but it can also, it fails also on other tasks, especially that relates to the human behavior, tasks that requires creativity, tasks that require empathy, or tasks that require complex human interaction. So I agree with the previous professor who indicated the issue of projects, videos, and stuff. So it is very important now to educate our learners on those things so that they can be able to leverage these tools, teaching them those soft skills to be innovative, empathy, complex human interactions. So that's what I can say for now.
Fabulous, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I really agree with you there in talking about a enhancement of critical digital literacy, because I guess it's easy enough to see the need for greater digital literacy. How do we actually use these things? But we also need our students to be asking why. You know, what's behind it? Whose interests are at play? Whose interests are being served? Who does this advantage? What does this promote? Why is this a good thing? What's the downside? You know, we need our students to be asking all of those questions, as well as just which button to press. Thank you ever so much. Okay, so on to Dr. Helen from the Nigerian perspective.
Okay, thank you. Not to rehash what the other panelists have said, which I quite agree with, I want to say that one way to revise or to review or improve on assessment is to look to the cognitive domain of learning propagated by Bloom's, in which learning and assessment go beyond just recall, but that it has to do with our cognitive ability, in which the highest form of it has to do with synthesis, has to do with evaluation, comprehension, and which goes beyond recall and remember kind of thing. Because with the advent of generative AI, they can easily do that. And so that speaks to the idea that in terms of our assessments, we should go beyond wanting students to simply regurgitate what they've learned, word for word, or to just recall and remember kind of thing. And this Bloom's taxonomy is an offshoot of what we find in the Socratic method, or Socratic act of questioning, also called dialectics. You know, Socrates is regarded as the father of Western philosophy, who lived in Athens, who was involved. I mean, this method is named after him, in which he assumed the role of a midwife to help learners, to help students, to help people on the streets to birth the knowledge he believed is innate in them. And so through a method that is self-critical, which is also reflective. And so in the age of AI, there is a need for such critical attitude in which the teacher is not a sage on a stage in the classroom and just speak or try to pour knowledge into students, but in which the teacher assumes the role of, you know, this Socratic midwife, in which you want to guide the students to knowledge because of the huge number of tools, huge number of information that is accessible to the student at this point. And I think one of the panelists also said it, that the teacher is no longer just a you know, like this very all-knowing kind of person, no, but rather the teacher becomes, you know, a kind of, you are more of a guide than a sage, because now you'll be using many collaborative tools. A lot of information is available to the student as well. And so you want to, as much as possible, help them to develop this critical thinking attitude, this act of questioning, this act of going beyond just the surface value, but wanting to interrogate in depth what is behind what appears to be the case. So in the case of Nigeria, that is, which I think can be universalized, that is how I think assessment should be going beyond just the idea of recall and remember kind of thing. And of course, it also brings about the idea of what is behind these tools that are being used. You know, in many principles of AI, which most of them, I mean, if not all of them, are from the global north, we have the principle of transparency, you know, which borders, especially as it pertains to education, that supposing we're using AI for assessment or maybe for grading, it should be that one understands the data in which the AI system was trained on in terms of data handling. It should be that one understands it, and one is able to also make the students understand what is being done. And so this idea of springing surprises or the data being shrouded in secrecy or where it's gotten from unknown should also be eliminated. So in terms of assessment concretely, it should be more of cognitive based, and the cognitive aspect of learning is an offshoot of the Socratic method, dialectic method of questioning. I'll stop there for now.
Okay, thanks very much. Yeah, all this conversation about Bloom's taxonomy and the nature of knowledge makes me think, does AI somehow reconfigure what actually knowledge consists of? I'm thinking of the Canadian connectivist ideas, you know, that said knowledge and learning are transformed by the amount of connectivity, by the amount of connection amongst us all. And I'm wondering, is there then a theory or a description which moves on from that incorporates AI, or does connectivism embrace that? That may be something to think about later. If we start on the next set of the next topic, I was curious. I've seen the phrase in the UK press about the hollowing out of the labour market, and it talks about perhaps the fourth industrial revolution, as Dr. David was calling it, the way in which jobs are progressively taken over by machines, and how those jobs were originally just the mechanical and repetitive jobs, but now they are the jobs of people like journalists and teachers. And I wonder, is this going to hollow out the international labour market as well as the national one? You know, that will it affect different countries differently? Will it affect their economic opportunities differently? And I wonder, starting with Professor Mausam from India, how it looks from an Indian perspective. You know, will India become disadvantaged because some of the jobs that India has specialised in are no longer being done by people but by machines?
Maybe yes, maybe no. I would say that this is the world. I mean, we are living in a world where AI is progressing very rapidly. And as a country, I think we recognize that if we don't try to and therefore become a leader in AI, we will be left behind. I think that sentiment is fairly understood by the Indian government. And so we are generally very late in everything, but the Indian government has been pretty fast in moving on the AI innovation space, and we brought out a national strategy document in 2018, and we have been really supporting AI research and so on and so forth. And this really speaks to the idea that the future of the world the AI will be playing a huge role in there, both in terms of the labor, in terms of the jobs, in terms of the financial side of things and economics. And we have to not be playing catch up, a few years down the line, right? The specific question you asked, because, for example, Indian IT industry is a very prominent part of Indian ecosystem and its GDP, and we recognize that IT industry may slowly be transforming into AI industry, or a lot of AI IT collaborations are starting to happen. And from my personal perspective, as a researcher, an AI researcher, I also envision that pretty much every field of influence is going to be affected by AI. And there may be many scenarios where teams of humans and AIs will become really, really common. I mean, we had seen this in many tiny settings like chess. For example, there was a time when humans were better than AI, then Deep Blue defeated Garry Kasparov. But today, if you think about who's the best chess player, it's not a human and it's not an AI system. It's a team of humans and AIs, because AI brings in the kind of search that it can bring, and humans bring in the kind of creativity and abstractions that they bring, and together they can do better than the sum of parts. I at least envision a world where this kind of a collaboration is going to become center stage. In pretty much every sphere of influence, we would find that there would be some AI contribution and some human contribution that will come together. And I at least believe, and who knows what is going to happen, but I don't believe that there will be hallowing of labor markets, but I do believe that there will be a transition. We will all need to learn to work with AI. We will all need to figure out where humans can bring in capabilities that AIs can't, and vice versa. And together, we would actually find things moving much better. Just as a thought experiment, there was a time when sometimes humans were better than AI. Then AI or machines started replacing humans. And then if you did the work as an artisan, it became pricey, because, oh, this is a human who has actually put together this article or product for you. This is not machine made. This is human made. It's craftsman. It's, and there were many things associated with the joy of a human making it. Maybe in some sectors that is going to happen, that if you have a human receptionist at a hotel, that's a posh hotel, that's a rich hotel, because some cases AI can do the job. But in most cases, I feel that the teams would be where we would see the future.
Okay, thanks very much. And Dr. David, how does this notion of the hollowing out of the labour market work in a South African context? Because you mentioned the fourth industrial revolution. How will that play out in the South African economy?
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, I think from my perspective, I think this hollowing out of the labor market effect is something that is real, especially when we are beginning to see technology producing other technology where the human is no longer in the picture. That's where the problem starts. When we have more and more robots producing other machines. So there, I think there will be a competition now between human and technology. So I think that thing is so real, which leads me to say, especially in the context of the education sector, that artificial intelligence is here to stay. So I was listening someone saying, educators who are resisting the use of technology, there is a danger that they will be replaced by educators who are using technology. So that is very, very real. And I must also indicate that because of these dangers, we should now start to talk of human-centered artificial intelligence, the application of artificial intelligence in a human-centered way to try and produce or develop artificial intelligence that augment the capabilities of human beings. So this, I think it needs all stakeholders to come into party, the government, the private sector, the education sector, to come together and come up with frameworks that shape or direct the deployment of these technologies, because the issue of the hollowing out effect is real. Thanks.
You. Yeah. And lastly, over to Dr. Helen from Nigeria. And I'm very conscious that we've actually chosen 4 countries with very, very different economies and maybe educational systems and infrastructure. So Dr. Helen, how do you think this will play out in the context of your learners going into the Nigerian economy?
Thank you. Let me begin with what might seem like a blanket statement. My opinion is that it is only those who are unable to self-regulate their learning that would be out of job due to AI. And the reason is simple. There was a time when we didn't have many computer operators. There was a time when it was just those operating typewriters, and computer came, while some graduated to learning how to make use of computers and retain their jobs. Others could not, and so they were gradually phased out of the system. Similar thing, I believe, is going to happen. And it's going to happen only if a person is not able to read the handwriting on the walls, that there is some kind of revolution in the future of work that may ease me out of the kind of work I do now. So we can't overemphasize the importance or the significance of having to be a lifelong learner, continuous self-improvement, because whether we like it or not, especially in the Nigerian context, with the way AI is developing in industries, in workplaces, and the kind of tasks we are able to use AI to accomplish, some persons would gradually be phased out. Some kind of work will be phased out. But as some kind of work are being phased out, some other ones are also coming up, like data analytics, machine learning, prompt engineers, AI support ethicists or ethics. Some other jobs are also being created. So I think the onus should be on each one of us to be on the lookout. Am I being strategic about retaining my work, or am I being redundant, or am I being too comfortable? Am I improving myself such that I can compete effectively with the revolution that is gradually creeping in? Because the development of AI in Nigeria is not as swift. It was only last year that the first robot was launched. Okay, but we know that in some other countries, robots, we already have this techno-human collaboration in workplace. But it's gradual, but it's also very important that we all stay alert and be sure that at some point in time, our work will not be taken over by AI. And we should also, as much as possible, continue to improve ourselves to become relevant so that we are not phased out by this revolution. I'll stop there.
That's almost presenting AI as a kind of evolutionary pressure that now human beings are forced to keep up or catch up, and we will ourselves evolve as the technologies evolve. That's a stimulating point of view. I think I ought to now say that we've had half an hour of contributions from across the panel, and there are questions appearing, lots of questions, in fact, appearing in the chat. And I think my colleagues at the Commonwealth of Learning are planning to then look at some of those and put them in front of the panelists and get their thoughts on what our participants have been asking. Is that right?
That's totally fine. Thank you, Professor John Traxler. Dear colleagues, I'm going to pose a question to you, and I will start with you, John, and then we can maybe ask some of the other panelists to also comment. There's a very good question from Tsedisho Kwayana asked in the chat box. With regard to students living with disabilities, what are the benefits of implementing AI, especially in a developing country? And I think that is very important for us. And that is one of the things from COL that is important for us, is how do we ensure access to education to all? Professor Asha Kalma always talks about the last person in the queue. So how do we ensure that this is something that's a bit more inclusive? So John, any response from your side?
I suppose I often think that many of the questions that are apparently educational or apparently technological are in fact political, are about how each of our countries and each of our societies decides to distribute resources and opportunities. And I suppose to some extent it's then a function of what pressure groups and what voices do disabled people have, and how can they make themselves heard and understood. And I think that can be very, very problematic, especially if it's compounded by distance and infrastructure. So I don't think there's one answer, and I don't think there's an easy answer. One would hope that AI opens up a variety of opportunities, maybe text to speech, speech to text, all sorts of different assistive technologies might be enhanced by artificial intelligence, but it does depend on the willingness and the resources moving, well, as you say, from the back of the queue nearer to the front of the queue.
Thank you very much. I don't know, are there any of the other panelists who want to react on this? If you can maybe just give an indication. Professor Maura, please go ahead.
So I'm hopeful that some of these generative AI technologies will actually help us to be able to personalize education. So, for example, you can move from one modality to another modality using these tools, from text to speech, from text to visual and audio and so forth. So I'm hopeful that we'll figure out ways to actually be able to use this to reach more people. I've been stunned trying to keep up with some of the developments. I read something recently about putting a person in some kind of, they put them in some kind of tube and they showed them images, and they were able, the AI was actually able to figure out just from the brain waves, you know, what they were thinking about. And I'm starting to think, well, what about people with speech impediments? How some of this technology can be used. So, and again, it's getting the money in the right places. And I think if we just leave this to the open market, that may be a real problem, because that's not where it's going to flow. But if we do this right, I think there's some amazing advances that could really help people with various disabilities.
Thank you very much. Any follow-up comment there? Otherwise, I will continue with the next question. Monica Hamilton has asked in the Q&A, how can we motivate students to learn, seeing that knowledge is at their fingertips? Many learners, especially those at the K-12 stage, do not find value in education, at least in the classroom setting, since they can get knowledge outside of the classroom. So the question, how do we motivate students then as an alternative? And should we? Would be my follow-up question. Anyone who wants to address that question, perhaps?
Oh,
Well,
yes, Dr. Helen, please go ahead.
okay, I just want to say that it's important as teachers to help learners to understand the distinction between information being available out there and knowledge. There's a lot of information out there, but when we talk about knowledge, it's more enduring. It takes a lot more time. And I would think that the advent of generative AI, especially ChatGPT, which is a fascinating way to learn because of the interaction, a kind of dialogue, a kind of conversation that goes on. It could be a leeway to encouraging them to find information that can eventually lead to knowledge, because when they're exposed to that, it's like a body, you know. You could just type something, ask, and it gives you an answer. You try to get it refined. It even apologizes to you sometimes if you inform me that you didn't quite get your earlier question right, you know, that kind of a thing. So it's quite interactive and fascinating, and I think it's a good way to start. It's a good way to start off on the path of knowledge, and not to think that it's everything that is out there on the internet or that generative AI gives that is actually knowledge. No, it could just be information. It could even be misinformation or disinformation. It could just be an opinion. And, you know, it's also important we make learners to understand that these are not accurate tools. They don't always provide accurate information. And so I think that is a good way to start, and as much as possible, get them to know that knowledge is something much more, but that a good way to start is this kind of generative AI, and to also make it as interactive and interesting, making them co-creators of knowledge itself, and not the teacher acting like a sage on a stage or something like that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. John, do you want to comment quickly on that? I heard you start speaking.
Sorry. Yeah, it sounded like a question about motivation. And I guess motivation is either intrinsic or extrinsic. Intrinsic meaning people want to learn because they're curious, or extrinsic because learning will open up economic opportunities. And either case, AI makes a difference. If you're curious, then you need to be more critical, because AI throws all sorts of the world's prejudices as well as all sorts of the world's information at you. And if it's extrinsic motivation about getting into the economy, then you need to recognize the extent to which AI changes the economy, and how you need to be a different kind of economic individual in order to move economically.
Yes, thank you very much, John. I'm just going to pose one or two more questions. Our time is running out. Maybe directly to Dr. David Mhlanga. One of the participants asked here, and I know with University of Johannesburg, you've been working with this. So how are you addressing the issue of fear of AI in education? Is that something that in the courses that you have at the University of Johannesburg, it's something that you've experienced? Any comment from your side?
Oh, okay. Thank you so much for that question. Yes, I think, yeah, there is a fear of AI. Why? Because for a long time, artificial intelligence, it was for a particular group. And when you read, it is whether it's an article, whether it's a book about artificial intelligence, it's all about mathematics and equations. And that brings fear in people when you talk about artificial intelligence. But like I said, what the University of Johannesburg did, they say, let's have introduction to artificial intelligence in the fourth industrial revolution, a course that everyone can understand, because artificial intelligence has got many aspects. We have the application aspect of artificial intelligence, the issue of ethics. Let's talk about those things. Let's have that discussion so that people do not see this thing as an animal where they cannot even be a participant. And I also want to indicate that we need to have multidisciplinary approach where people from different disciplines, they come together, interact together, and talk about these issues and apply this artificial intelligence in their own discipline. I think in a way, it can help to address this issue of fear. And as I conclude, the issue of black box, where people do not know, like ChatGPT at the moment, you don't know what is happening there. You ask a question, you get the answer, but the algorithm, the data that was used to train it, no one knows. So all those things, I think, needs to be discussed for them to be clear, and that I think it can help to address the issue of fear.
Thank you very much. I think in the interest of time, Professor John Traxler, any final comments from your side before we close?
No, I think it's fascinating, and it's opened up an awful lot of questions, most of which we hadn't had the time to answer. But if there's any way of pursuing the discussion here or elsewhere, I think it is very important at the moment, and represents a challenge to different people in different societies, learners, teachers, universities, employers, and is certainly significant. So thanks everyone for making the time available and joining in.
Thank you very much. From my side, we sincerely thank all the participants in this discussion. A special word of thanks to our moderator, Professor John Traxler, as well as our panelists for sharing their expertise. Thank you, Dr. Helen Olojede, Professor Maura Grossman, Professor Mausam, Dr. David Mhlanga. We appreciate your contributions. The following aspects stood out from today's discussion. The fact that we need to redefine teaching and learning and assessment, the need for critical skills, and to be careful not to de-skill in the process. A lot was said about the unequal playing field, the digital divide that is actually perpetuated, and a couple of the questions we didn't address also mentioned this. So we need to teach our students what ChatGPT is, what generative AI is, and how it works, and embrace it. As colleagues said, we have to move away from that silo thinking, and the importance of lifelong learning is also very evident. It's essential that in the process of incorporating generative AI in educational spaces, we ensure responsible use of such technologies. Within the context of today's discussion, we acknowledge the Commonwealth of Learning's role as acting as an enabler, a capacity builder, and catalyst towards the use of generative AI in a responsible manner that is, especially in the ever-evolving open and distance learning environment. Dear colleagues, this recording will be made available through COL's YouTube channel. The link will be available through is actually available through the COL website. But from myself, Jaco Willifeer, and my colleague Jane Agbu, and the panelists, thank you very much for joining us, and all the best to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you.